Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians and their ancestors of the unceded lands and waters on which we live, work and depend. We recognise all First Nations peoples around the world and celebrate their enduring connections to country and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. The last decade has really seen a focus on locally led response to disasters. Our research has charted the course of the localisation agenda, and now we have reached the point where we seek to understand, is it working? Are we meeting the needs of communities in line with their priorities, as intended? More to the point, are we shifting the power to communities and local actors affected by crises?
Yet everything we know about making aid work in complex, highly rapidly changing environments tells us you need feedback all the time. You need context-specific knowledge. You need people on the ground willing to take leadership and risk. And if you want to do anything other than just keep people alive in a crisis, locally led has got to be part of the big picture.
While the humanitarian sector has made significant strides with various frameworks and tools to support more localised action, there's still a gap in understanding how these approaches are impacting affected communities. Without a defined pathway and a clear endpoint, the sector is unlikely to make the important shift to more evidence-based localisation practice. Above all, this means understanding impacts at the community level, where humanitarian action aims to make a difference. So how can we gather this evidence to change this? Over the past 3 years, Humanitarian Advisory Group has been exploring ways to measure the impact of localisation at the community level. Our first paper, A Pathway to Localisation Impact, Laying the Foundations, introduced a model to support humanitarian actors to better define and understand the impact of their localisation practices on crisis-affected populations. This was then tested by partnering with organisations implementing humanitarian programs in Pakistan, in Bangladesh and in the Philippines, with a research team walking alongside to define and measure changes that took place at the community level because of localised practices. In this episode, we'll chat with members of our partnering research team involved in testing the model in Pakistan. I'm Beth Eggleston, and this is I Think You're on Mute. I'm delighted to have Aaftab and Zaki Ullah join us all the way from Pakistan. Aaftab and Zaki are close friends of HAG and have been our partners since the first iteration of Humanitarian Horizons. Welcome to you both. Can you please introduce yourselves to our listeners?
Thank you, Beth. I am Aaftab and I'm working with GLOW since last 3 years, and in collaboration with HAG, I was part of more than 12 assignments. So thank you for inviting us to this podcast today.
You're welcome, Aaftab. Thank you. And Zaki, over to you.
Thanks, Beth. And first of all, thank you very much for having me on this podcast today. My name is Zaki. I'm heading an organization based in Pakistan, GLOW Consultants, which is a research firm. And we are partnering with HAG for the last 8 years now. And it's a fantastic journey throughout.
Thank you so much, Zaki. So my first question is for you, Zaki, actually. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the framework hopes to do and why impact at the community level really matters?
Yeah, Beth, thanks for asking this question, a very important one. So let me try to respond it comprehensively. So there's a lot of discussion or a buzzword, localization, for a while now. There's a lot of donor funding going there, other organizations working on it, eventually building the capacity of the local actors, local organization, putting them in the leadership role with expectation. But then at the same time, there's a little bit other discussion that whether is this the humanitarian sector sort of end goal to achieve from this localization, or do we want to be having something else? For example, a more robust, better response for the affected population. So whether the localization till the organization level is an end itself, or is it a mean for the broader objective or impact at the community level? So that was the sort of a background where all this the work we did on the framework, and eventually we came up with this framework, because previously there was none sort of discussion or a framework how to measure the impact of localization on on the communities level. Everything, or the discussions would stop at the organization level, the local actor level. So the framework that we developed is in line with the sort of international guidelines, standard that humanitarian actors adhere to. For example, core humanitarian standards pretty much aligned to what is there. And then it is looking into the localized practices, measuring the impact of having localized practices and its impact on the communities, but also looking into the that how those localized practices were adopted by the local partners or improved based on the input or the assistance or help provided by the international actors. So that's the sort of background, and that's the importance of this framework, which is kind of unique.
Absolutely. I agree with you that it's unique. So, Aaftab, we've worked together with Glow on the development of the model and the approach in Pakistan. Can you share what some of the key takeaways were from that process?
Thank you, Beth. As working in collaboration with HAG, we, the GLOW, the Localization Impact Measurement Framework, which we checked with the local organization Shifa. So they provided us with the valuable insights. Some of the key takeaways or findings I'd like to mention. The first one, that the shelter design and technical skills from an international organization, and then that was more localized and traditional building practices. Like one of the standout example I would mention here, that was in the shelter design process. Like Shifa, they working with an INGO, they captured the technical skills from that INGO related to the construction standards and some other safety standards. These skills were then localized with the traditional building practices and materials that were more suitable and familiar to the community. Second one, I would mention that is the community feedback mechanism. Shifa, with the support from an international partner, they developed a specialized software to systematically capture, track, and address the community feedback. So this allowed Shifa to refine their shelter design based on the real-time input from the community. And they brought changes after receiving the feedback on ventilation issues in the initial design. They were able to quickly adopt the plan to improve airflow, which was crucial in that hot weather in that specific area. So thank you. These were the initial findings from the framework.
Thank you so much, Aaftab. And I think these examples that you've given have really allowed us to see how useful this framework can really be. And Zaki, how do you think we can get this framework that we've developed together into the hands of those who will find it the most useful?
Yeah, again, very important aspect, because what we have seen that organizations come up with sort of frameworks, or the research comes up with a very good solutions for some problems, but then those solutions were not adopted. And one of the key reason is the dissemination. Many people, many stakeholders who are actually interested in such sort of solutions, they are unaware of it. So dissemination, reaching out to the stakeholders who would be interested. This is something we are doing today as well with this podcast. Hopefully, more stakeholders, whether they are the donors who are interested in localization sort of work, the UN agencies, even the local actors themselves, if they want to see and assess their localized practices. So with dissemination is the key.
Yeah, thank you so much, Zaki. And indeed, we will be including the link to the framework on the show notes, and it's there and open for everyone to use on our website. Aaftab, I'd love to reflect a little bit more on some of what you were saying. You've really been able to paint a picture for us around how useful this has been in a very practical sense. I'm keen to understand, what are your future hopes for this framework and the insights that it will hopefully deliver?
our hopes from this framework are that expanding the evidence-based practices, we hope that the framework continues to provide a detailed evidence that support the effectiveness of the localized approaches in future. Second one, that is strengthening the local leadership, like previously as I gave the example. So I hope that this framework will empower the local organizations like Shifa, which were empowered by one of the INGO. So they should empower these organizations to take lead in the humanitarian response by showcasing their success in enhancing community engagement and accountability. So the framework can help shift power dynamics toward more locally led initiative.
Thank you, Aaftab. And I love what you're saying because it's all about shifting power. That's absolutely what we're talking about. And Zaki, you mentioned that the framework is easy to use. I think this is such a key point. We want our research to turn into tools and guidance that's very accessible and easy to use for all different types of organizations. So throughout our partnership, we've been able to co-design this framework, and we're really looking forward to socializing this with you and really hope that we are able to learn from more insights in the future as we see the framework used in practice. Thank you so much for your insights today. It's been great to hear from you and to hear what's been happening with the framework in Pakistan. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Beth.
Thank you.
Building on these insights from Zaki and Aaftab, we found there were 5 main lessons when testing the model in Pakistan. 1. The approach can be linked to other levels of localisation measurement initiatives to ensure that it aligns with the broader localisation context and to avoid approaches being siloed. 2. There is a need to consider the scale implications and considerations of the framework. The existing domains in the model were helpful in guiding initial discussions and assessments, providing a structured framework for the research team's consideration of potential areas of impact and influence. 3. The accompaniment process was a useful approach, not only to define outcomes, but to support strengthened capacity and sharing understanding of critical monitoring and evaluation approaches. 4. Structured processes and timelines are not central to building strong relationships and engagement with communities. And 5. Incorporate learning from other localisation initiatives to ensure mutual learning and reinforce best practice approaches to localisation measurement.
If we can ally the heavy lifting power and science of the international agencies onto the local knowledge and commitment of the community groups and put a local group in the driving seat, then and only then will we have an aid system capable of addressing the coming challenges of our more globalized and chaotic world. Locally led aid and true partnerships with international agencies will increase the appropriateness of aid. It will increase the connectedness to the at-risk communities. And ultimately, it will increase aid effectiveness. This can happen. It is happening.
So, with all of this, we need to ask ourselves those questions from the beginning of this episode. Are we meeting the needs of communities in line with their priorities as intended? More to the point, are we shifting the power to communities and local actors affected by crises? More evidence is needed, but in the model tested in Pakistan, Bangladesh, and in the Philippines, yes, there are changes happening at the community level because of localised practices. The shift is happening. In the next episode, we'll be reflecting on all we've learned through our Humanitarian Horizons program and sharing our main takeaways from 6 years of research. I hope you can join me. I'm Beth Eggleston, and this is I Think You're on Mute. This podcast was produced and recorded by Room 3, a production company that works with not-for-profits and social enterprises, and supported by Green Letter Communications.